This module is about stress. It's module 12.3, stress, health, and coping. After studying this module, you should be able to describe and evaluate Celia's concept of stress, discuss the difficulties of measuring stress, give examples of how stress can affect health by altering behavior, describe the role of cortisol and the immune system in stress effects on health, explain the evidence suggesting that some people are more predisposed than others to post-traumatic stress disorder, list ways to cope with stress, and describe procedures that might facilitate forgetting of a traumatic experience. Imagine you met a man suffering from multiple sclerosis. Would you say it's his own fault? He's being punished for his sins? Many people in previous times believed just that. We congratulate ourselves today on having learned not to blame the victim. Or have we? We think that cigarette smokers are at fault if they develop lung cancer. We note that AIDS is more common among people with a history of intravenous drug use or unsafe sex. As we learn more and more about the causes of various illnesses, we expect people to accept more responsibility for their own health. It is easy to overstate the effects of behavior on health. Even if you're careful about your diet, exercise regularly, and avoid all known risks, sooner or later, you will become ill anyway. Health psychology addresses how people's behavior influences health. In this module, we focus on stress, the effects of stress on health, and the means of coping with stress. Stress is not itself an example of emotion, but it provokes strong emotions. Stress. Have you ever gone without several nights in a row trying to meet a deadline? Or waited in a dangerous area for someone who was supposed to pick you up? Or had a close friend suddenly not want to see you anymore? Or tried to explain why you no longer want to date someone? These experiences and countless others cause stress. Celia's concept of stress. Hans Celia, an Austrian-born physician who worked at McGill University in Montreal, noticed a wide variety of illnesses produce the same symptoms: fever, inactivity, sleepiness, loss of appetite, and release of the hormone cortisol, which enhances metabolism and increases the supply of sugar to the cells. While doing laboratory research with rats, he noted that the same symptoms followed many stressful experiences, including heat, cold, confinement, the sight of a cat, or an injection of anything. He inferred that the body reacts with fever, inactivity, and so forth to any threat, and that these symptoms were the body's way of defending itself. According to Celia, 1979, stress is the nonspecific response of the body to any demand made upon it. Any demand evokes responses that propel the body for fighting a threat, prepare the body for fighting a threat. Celia's concept of stress included any experience that changes someone's life. Getting married and getting a good job are presumably pleasant experiences, but they also require changes in your life. So in Celia's sense, they produce stress. However, Celia's definition does not include the effects of anything unchanging, such as poverty, racism, or a lifelong disability. It also ignores stress that we experience vicariously. Many people experience serious stress from watching television coverage of tragic events. An alternative definition of stress is an event or events that are interpreted as threatening to an individual and which elicit physiological and behavioral responses. Because this definition highlights what an individual interprets as threatening, It recognizes that an event might be stressful to you and not someone else, or to you at one time and not at another. For example, seeing a snake in the backyard could terrify one person but not another. A critical word from your boss might disturb you, but not as much if you know why your boss is in a bad mood. Celia described the general adaptation syndrome, the body's response to stressful events of any type. It begins with the alarm stage, marked by activity of the sympathetic nervous system to prepare the body for vigorous activity. Because the sympathetic nervous system cannot sustain long term arousal, extended stress sends the body into the resistance stage when the adrenal glands release cortisol and other hormones that maintain alertness. The body also saves energy by decreasing unnecessary activity. Even, even longer intense stress, the body enters exhaustion, marked by fatigue, inactivity, and decreased ability to resist illness. After an earthquake produced the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster in Japan, many families had to seek temporary shelter far from home. In the short run, they felt energized, but when they couldn't resume their normal lives, they became depressed. Measuring stress. To do research on stress, we need to measure it. One approach is to give people a checklist of stressful experiences. For example, the Social Readjustment Rating Scale lists 43 life events. The authors of this test asked people to rate how stressful each event would be, and on that basis, they assigned each event a certain number of points, such as 100 for death of a spouse and 11 for a traffic ticket. On this questionnaire, you check the events you experienced recently, and a psychologist totals your points to measure your stress. Checklists of this sort have serious problems. One is the assumption that many small stressors add up the same as one large stressor. For example, graduating from college, receiving unexpected money, moving to a new address, and starting a new job are all considered stressors. According to the checklist, this combination rates almost twice as many points as you would get from a divorce. Another problem is the ambiguity of many items. You get 44 points for change in health of a family member. You would certainly check that item if you discover your 5-year-old son or daughter has diabetes. Should you also check it if your aunt, whom you seldom see, recovers nicely from a bout of influenza? Apparently, you get to decide what counts and what doesn't. Moreover, a given event has different meanings depending on how people interpret the event and what they can do about it. Becoming pregnant is not the same for a 27-year-old married woman as for an unmarried 16-year-old. Losing a job is shattering for a 50-year-old, mildly disappointing for a 17-year-old, and trivial for an actor who works in many plays each year and never expects any of them to last long. How would you feel about winning a silver medal in the Olympics? Most of us would feel great, but many silver medal winners are disappointed that they didn't win the gold. What matters is not the event itself, but what it means to you. Yet another problem with Celia's approach is that it considers all types of stressors to be equivalent, except in amount. Later research has found that personal rejection is especially troubling, such as comes from a romantic breakup, being fired from a job, or any other occasion when a person feels excluded and rejected. The type of stress is particularly likely to lead to health problems. The effects of stress depend not only on the unpleasant events, hassles that we have to deal with, but also on pleasant events, uplift that brighten our day. Table 12.1 presents one example of this approach. How stress affects health. People who have recently endured severe stress, such as divorce or the death of a husband or wife, have an increased risk of medical problems, ranging from life-threatening illnesses to tooth decay. The risk is greater for the first 3 months, but still apparent a year after the event. How does stress lead to health problems? Indirect effects. Stress can influence health by altering people's behavior. For example, people who have just lost a husband or wife tend to lose their appetite. They forget to take their medications, they don't sleep well, and they might engage in excessive drinking. Stress also impairs health in roundabout ways. Back in the 40s, a midwife who delivered 3 female babies on Friday the 13th announced that all 3 were hexed and would die before the 23rd birthday. The first 2 did die young, and the third woman approached her 23rd birthday, she checked into a hospital and informed the staff of her fears. The staff noted that she dealt with her anxiety by extreme hyperventilation, deep breathing. Shortly before her birthday, she hyperventilated to death. Why did this happen? Ordinarily, when people do not breathe involuntarily, the carbon dioxide in the blood triggers reflexive breathing. By extreme hyperventilation, this woman exhaled so much carbon dioxide that she did not have enough left to trigger reflexive breathing. When she stopped breathing voluntarily, she stopped breathing altogether. Clinopathologic Conference, 1967. This is a clear but very unusual example of an indirect effect of emotions on health. The fact that she believed the hex caused its fulfillment. Direct effects. Stress also affects health more directly. Suppose you have a miserable job, you live in a war zone, or you live with someone who is often abusive. If you face a constant threat, you activate your adrenal glands to release more cortisol, which enhances metabolism and enables cells to combat stress. A moderate brief increase in cortisol improves attention and memory. Stress also activates parts of your immune system, preparing it to fight anything from infections to tumors. Presumably, the reason is that throughout our evolutionary history, stressful situations often led to injury, so the immune system must be ready to fight infections. That effect made more sense when injuries were people's main source of stress. Today, the immune system reacts to the stress of things that have nothing to do with infection or bacteria, such as giving a public lecture. When intense stress activates the immune system actively could produce fever and sleepiness. You feel ill and look ill, even if you are not. Still more prolonged stress leads to exhaustion. You feel withdrawn, your performance declines, and you complain about low quality of life. Prolonged high release of cortisol damages the hippocampus, a key brain area for memory. Eventually, overuse of the immune system weakens it, and you become more vulnerable to illness. Heart disease. An upholsterer repairing the chairs in a physician's waiting room once noticed that the fronts of the chairs wore out before the back. To figure out why, the physician began watching his patients in the lobby of the waiting room. He noticed that his heart patients habitually sat on the front edges of their seats, waiting impatiently to be called in for their appointments. This observation led to a hypothesis linking personality, relating heart disease to an impatient, stress-driven personality, now known as type A personality. People with type A personality are highly competitive, initiating on always winning. They are impatient and often hostile. By contrast, people with a type B personality are more easygoing, less hurried, and less hostile. Heart disease correlates with type A behavior, especially with the hostility aspect, but only weakly with but only weakly. The best way to conduct the research is to measure personality now and heart problems later. We want to know how personality affects heart problems, not how heart problems affect personality. A study of that kind found a correlation of only 0.08 between hostility and heart disease. However, another study found that heart disease is more common in the US countries where people found that people's tweets included more messages of hate and hostility. The strongest known psychological effect on heart disease is social support. People with strong relationships and family ties usually take better care of themselves and keep their heart rate and blood pressure under control. People who learn techniques for imagining stress lower and however, another study found that heart disease is most common in the US counties where people's streets include messages of hate and hostility. The strongest psychological influence on heart disease is social support. People with strong friendships and family ties usually take better care of themselves and keep their heart rate and blood pressure under control. People often learn techniques for managing stress, lowering their blood sugar and pressure, and decreasing the risk of heart disease. Variations on the prevalence of heart disease across cultures may depend on behavior. In some cultures, people walk very fast, wear watches, and tend to everything in a hurry. In other more relaxed cultures, in other cultures, people are seldom in a rush. Almost nothing happens on a schedule, but no one seems to care. As you might guess, heart disease is more common in countries with a hurried pace. Post-traumatic stress disorder. A profound result of severe stress is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, marked by prolonged anxiety and depression. Post-traumatic stress disorder. A profound result of severe stress is post-traumatic stress disorder marked by a prolonged anxiety and depression. This condition has been recognized in post-war periods throughout history under such terms as battle fatigue and shell shock. It also occurs in rape or assault victims, torture victims, It also occurs in rape or assault victims, torture victims, survivors of life-threatening accidents, and witnesses to a murder. People with PTSD suffer from frequent nightmares, outbursts of anger, unhappiness, guilt, and impairing in both work and family life. A brief reminder of the tragic experience might trigger a flashback that borders on panic. However, most people who endure a traumatic event do not develop PTSD. In fact, the probability of developing PTSD correlates poorly with the stressfulness of the event. Am I right? And more strongly with previous anxiety and depression. It also correlates with catastrophic thinking, characterized often by expecting the worst possible outcomes. Many soldiers who suffered post-traumatic stress disorder had already experienced pre-traumatic stress. Many soldiers who suffer post-traumatic stress disorder had already experienced pre-traumatic stress disorder. Prior to military deployment, they reported disturbing evidence of what might happen in combat with dreams, and attempts to avoid any reminders of any possible combat. Some people are more vulnerable than others. Most PTSD victims have a smaller than average hippocampus, and the brains differ from average in several other ways. Yehuda, 1997, given that stress releases cortisol, that high levels of cortisol damage the hippocampus, it would seem likely that high stress causes the smaller hippocampus. One such study However, one study compared monozygotic twins in which one twin developed PTSD after wartime experiences and the other who was not in battle and did not develop PTSD. However, one study compared monozygotic twins in which one twin developed PTSD after wartime experiences, and the other was not in battle and did not develop PTSD. The result, both twins had a smaller than average hippocampus. These results imply that the hippocampus was already small before the trauma, perhaps for genetic reasons, and having a small hippocampus increases the risk of PTSD. Many psychologists have assumed that talking to a therapist soon after a traumatic event might be helpful. However, most studies find that such interventions have little benefit and often make people feel worse. If you have a traumatic experience, you might if you have a traumatic experience, you might want not to talk about it. And you might want to talk about just at certain times or to certain people. Talking about your trauma more than you wanted to it just makes things worse. Coping with stress. How you react to an event depends not only on the event itself, but also on how you interpret it. Was it better or worse than you expected? Do you think that it was precaution to do you think it was a one-time event or the start of a trend? Your reaction also depends on your personality. Some people keep their spirits high in the face of tragedy, whereas others are devastated by minor setbacks. Coping with stress is the process of getting through difficult times. People cope with stress in many ways, grouped into three categories. One is problem-focused coping, in which you do something that improves the situation. Reappraisal is reintroducing a situation to make it seem less threatening. Emotion-focused coping is regulating one's emotional reaction. Suppose you are nervous about an upcoming test. Studying harder is problem-focused method of coping. Deciding that your grade is not very important is a reappraisal. Deep breathing exercises are an emotion-focused method. Each of these coping strategies works well under certain circumstances. And the best strategy is to be flexible in picking the strategy suited to the current situation. If you should use problem-focused coping, if you see a way to improve the situation, you should use it. You should use problem-focused coping. If you have little or no control, you should shift to reappraisal or emotion-focused coping. The distinction among coping styles is not a firm one. For example, if you seek help and support from friends, their support helps calm emotions, but it also may deal with the problem, help dad to help deal with the situation. Problem-focused coping. In many cases, the best way to handle stress is to do something about the problem. Often it helps to get a small preview of an upcoming experience, a process called inoculation. Armies have soldiers practice combat skills under realistic conditions. A police training might pretend to interview or intervene while two people enact a violent quarrel. If you are nervous about going into your landlord with a complaint, you might practice what you plan to say while your friend plays the part of the landlord. Some people are so nervous about saying or doing the wrong thing that they avoid dating opportunities by role playing. By role playing, they avoid dating opportunities. By role playing, they practice dating behaviors with unassigned partners and reduce their apprehension. A feeling of control reduces stress. Suppose a snowstorm has trapped you in a small cabin. You have food and fuel, but you have no idea how long you'll be stuck. The snow melts 5 days later, enabling you to leave. Contrast that with a case where you decide to isolate yourself in a cabin for 5 days so you can finish a painting. In both cases, you spend 5 days in a cabin, but when you do it voluntarily, you know what to expect. You feel in control. And you have less stress. Hospital patients who are told exactly what to expect show less anxiety and recover more quickly than average. Thinking that you have control is calming, even if you really don't. In one study, people received painfully hot stimuli to their arms while playing a video game. Participants in one group knew they had no control over the pain. Those on the other group were told incorrectly that they could decrease the painful stimuli if they made the correct joystick response quickly enough. In fact, the painful stimuli varied randomly, but whenever it decreased, these people assumed they were responding quickly enough. Those who thought they were in control reported less pain, and brain scans confirmed the pain-sensitive areas of the brain responded less strongly. Coping by reappraisal. Suppose you're in a situation that offers no control. You underwent medical tests and you are nervously awaiting the results. While waiting, what can you do? You might reappraise the situation. Even if the news is bad, I can handle it. It's an opportunity for me to rise to the occasion, to see how strong I can be. People who recover well from tragedies and defeats say that many try to see the positive side of any event. Most people like to maintain a moderately optimistic outlook, even when it is not completely accurate. Here is an example of reappraisal. Students were asked to restrain their emotions while examining pictures with disturbing images, such as injured people and crying children. Those who restrained their emotions most successfully relied on reinterpreting the pictures. For example, they might regard a picture of an injured person as someone about to receive good medical care. In another study, young adults in Israel who practiced reappraisal to control their anger became more inclined to approach the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with conciliation and less likely to advocate violence. Suppose you have to give a public speech tomorrow or meet with your boss and you feel such high arousal that your hands are shaking and your voice is trembling. An effective strategy is to reappraise your arousal. I'm not nervous, I'm excited. Embracing the arousal as a good thing leads to a more successful performance. Emotion-focused coping. Emotion-focused strategies do not solve a problem, but they help you manage your reaction to it. If you do feel fear, anger, sadness, or distress, would it help to simply suppress your emotions and act as if you're doing okay? It might, though suppressing your emotional expressions takes considerable effort. Most Europeans and North Americans find it difficult and unpleasant to suppress emotions. However, people in Asian cultures, such as Japan and China, routinely practice emotional suppression, especially in the presence of others, and they find it much less burdensome. In addition to actively suppressing emotions, other ways of handling them include social support, relaxation, exercise, and distraction. In addition to actively suppressing emotions, other ways of handling them include social support, relaxation, exercise, and distraction. Social support. When you feel bad, do you turn to others for support? This tendency varies across cultures. An American might discuss personal problems with a friend without necessarily expecting that friend to help. In Asian cultures, anyone who knows about your problem feels obliged to help. Therefore, many Asians avoid telling people about their difficulties for fear of burdening them with an obligation. Social support is helpful in many situations. A study found that people who had recently fallen in love reacted less strongly than usual to stress of watching an unpleasant film. Even if the loved one wasn't present. Close contact with a loved one helps even more. Researchers recorded women's reactions while they waited to receive an electric shock. At various times, each woman held her husband's hand, an unfamiliar man's hand, or no hand, as shown in figure 1222. On average, a woman reported less unpleasantness and lower arousal while holding her husband's hand. Holding the hand of an unfamiliar man helped less. Women who reported a highly satisfactory marriage received more benefit from holding their husband's hand than did women reporting a less satisfactory marriage. Relaxation. Relaxation is an excellent way to reduce unnecessary anxiety. Here are some suggestions. Find a quiet place, or at least one with the noise, where the noise is not disturbing. Adopt a comfortable position, relaxing your muscles. If you're not sure how to do so, start with the opposite. Tense all your muscles so you notice how they feel. Then relax them one by one, starting from your toes and working toward your head. Reduce sources of stimulation, including your own thoughts. Focus your eyes on a simple, unexciting object, or repeat something, a word, a phrase, a prayer, perhaps the Hindu syllable Om, whatever feels comfortable to you. Don't worry about anything, not even about relaxing. If worrisome thoughts pop into your head, dismiss them with, oh well. People who practice this or other forms of meditation report that they feel less stressed. Many improve their overall health. Teachers who went through an 8-week meditation program showed benefits in handling threatening situations and in showing compassion to other people. Exercise. Exercise also reduces stress. It may seem contradictory to say that both relaxation and exercise reduce stress, but exercise helps people relax. Researchers found that students reported less stress on days when they had exercised and on days when they had a good sleep the night before. People in good physical condition react less strongly than average to stressful events. An event that would elevate heart rate enormously in other people elevates it moderately in someone who has been exercising regularly. The exercise should be consistent, almost daily, but it does not need to be vigorous. In fact, strenuous activity often worsens someone's mood. The benefit of exercise depends partly on expectations. Researchers studied the female room attendants at 7 hotels. They randomly chose certain hotels to inform these women correctly that their daily activities constitute good exercise that meets recommendations for a healthy, active lifestyle. When the researchers followed up 4 weeks later, they found that the women who were told they were getting good exercise had in fact lost weight and their blood pressure had decreased, even though they reported no actual change in their activities. Activity is more helpful if you think of it as healthy exercise than if you think of it as dull work. Distraction. Another emotion-focused strategy is to distract yourself. Hospitalized patients handle pain better if they distract themselves with a nice view, pleasant music, or other activity. The Lamaze method teaches pregnant women to suppress the pain of childbirth by concentrating on breathing. Many people distract themselves from stressful or sad events by shopping. If you find yourself brooding about some disappointment, you might feel better after reminding yourself of pleasant or successful experiences in your past. Like exercise, the effectiveness of distraction depends partly on expectations. In one study, college students were asked to hold their fingers in ice water until the sensation became too painful to endure. Some of them listened to music of their own choice and were told that listening to music would reduce the pain. Others listened to music, but without the suggestion that it would ease the pain. Still others heard nothing, but were told that a special ultrasonic sound was being transmitted that would lessen the pain. The group that heard music and expected it to reduce the pain tolerated the pain better than either of the other two groups did. Evidently, neither the music nor the suggestion of reduced pain is as effective as both are together. All of us can learn to handle stress better by using the techniques just described, but some people handle it better naturally. We say they have resilience, the ability to handle difficult situations with a minimum of distress. A longitudinal study of police officers found that those who showed mostly positive emotions at the start were more likely than the others to handle their later stressful experiences well. A study of resilience among people of low socioeconomic status attributed part of their success to having good role models who taught them to persist through difficult situations by finding meaning in life and maintaining an optimistic viewpoint. Forgetting a stressful experience. Most problems related to anxiety or depression are precipitated by a stressful experience. If you've had a painfully stressful experience, would you want to forget it? You probably would not want to forget it happened, but you might want to forget the emotional pain. And you might want to weaken the memory enough that fewer events will remind you of it. A fair amount of animal research deals with ways to facilitate extinction of a fear memory. Suppose a rodent had repeated experiences in which a visual or auditory stimulus predicts shock. That stimulus will now provoke fear, which the animal shows by freezing in place whenever it sees or hears that stimulus. If we now present the stimulus by itself repeatedly, we will produce extinction of the learned fear, but the extinction is temporary. After a delay, the fear returns, spontaneous recovery. Similarly, when people undergo extinction training to combat PTSD, phobia, or other anxieties, the usual result is a temporary suspension followed by a later return of the anxiety. Research on memory has discovered the following. Suppose stimulus A has been paired with a shock, or anything else. Days later, present stimulus A again by itself. At that time, the memory is in a malleable state. Ordinarily, the brain remembers the previous training and reconsiders the memory at that point. However, a new experience can modify the original memory, and certain procedures can disrupt the reconsolidation. One way to disrupt reconsolidation is to administer drugs that block protein synthesis. Another way is distraction, as research has demonstrated with both laboratory animals and humans. For example, show a film that reevokes a painful memory, and then 10 minutes later, have the person play the video game Tetris for 12 minutes. Apparently, keeping working memory active at the point decreases reconsolidation and weakens the memory. Happily, it weakens the physiological response to the memory without destroying the declarative memory. That is, a person remembers the facts, but has less response to them. So far, most of the research has been with laboratory animals, and only a few studies have dealt with humans. The procedure seems promising, but the effectiveness depends on detail of the procedure. The previous paragraph mentioned a study in which people played Tetris 10 minutes after the remainder of a stressful experience. That 10-minute delay was crucial. Waiting with longer or shorter delays, the procedure failed. Similarly, in all other studies, the delay had to be right, and the right delay is not the same from one study to another. Applying a procedure like this for treating human anxieties may be possible, but finding the correct parameters for each unique situation will be difficult.